Look around you. We live in a world that is utterly obsessed with optimization. We track our steps, we optimize our sleep schedules, we download productivity apps to squeeze every single drop of efficiency out of our 24 hours. And somewhere along the line, a multi-billion-dollar wellness industry convinced us that sitting silently in a room, closing our eyes, and watching our breath was the ultimate productivity hack. We are told that meditation is the perfect antidote to the modern grind, a reliable tool to reduce our stress, sharpen our decision-making, and boost our emotional resilience. But what if I told you that the modern corporate version of meditation is just the tip of a massive, deeply strange existential iceberg? But what if the science behind this ancient practice is revealing things about the human mind that standard neuroscience can barely explain? For millennia, across completely different cultures, geographic boundaries, and religious traditions, humans have discovered that if you turn the mind's eye inward, something profound happens. In ancient India, the earliest documented roots of meditation emerged in the Vedas and Upanishads, somewhere between 800 and 300 BCE. These weren't relaxation exercises. They were radical, dangerous quests for liberation, what they called moksha, seeking to realize the ultimate unity between the individual self, Atman, and the cosmos, Brahman. Later, classical yoga systems like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras around the 2nd century BCE to 4th century CE mapped out rigorous internal architectures to quiet the fluctuations of the mind. Around the 5th century BCE, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, systematized this process even further. He split mental training into samatha, which is calm abiding concentration, and vipassana, which means raw, unadulterated insight into the nature of reality. In China, these frameworks collided with Taoist philosophies of Wu Wei, or effortless action, giving birth to Chan Buddhism, which we later came to know in the West as Zen. Zen gave us paradoxical koans, designed to smash our rational, conceptual minds entirely. Meanwhile, other cultures developed their own parallel internal sciences. Early Christian monks practiced hesychasm, using repetitive internal prayer to find absolute inner stillness, while Sufi mystics in Islam used dhikr, rhythmic remembrance and physical movement to alter their conscious states. Meditation is a true convergent discovery of human civilization. Multiple societies, completely isolated from one another, discovered the exact same cognitive toolkit. Today, there are thousands of peer-reviewed papers exploring how meditation impacts attention, memory, brain structure, and clinical disorders like depression and chronic pain. We treat it like mental exercise, a workout for your gray matter. But here's the catch. The deeper scientists look into the brains of seasoned practitioners, the more the standard scientific model begins to fray at the edges. Advanced meditators describe states of pure awareness that contain no thoughts, no sensory data, and no images whatsoever. How can a brain experience nothing while remaining fully awake? Today, we're going to look past the corporate mindfulness apps and dive straight into the deep end. We are going to explore the 10 most enduring, mind-bending mysteries of meditation that sit directly at the intersection of cutting-edge neuroscience, subjective human experience, and the philosophy of mind. These 10 puzzles aren't just gaps in our data, they are profound clues that challenge our fundamental understanding of what consciousness actually is. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's explore the frontiers of the mindful brain. Mystery 1. Why does the sense of self sometimes disappear? Let's start with a mystery that hits right at the core of who you think you are. If I asked you to point to yourself, you'd probably point to your chest or your head. You have a deeply ingrained, persistent feeling that you are a localized subject sitting behind your eyes, looking out at an external world. You have a name, a personal history, a narrative about your past, and an anxious inner monologue about your future. But ask an advanced meditator what happens during deep, non-dual practice, and they will tell you something deeply unsettling. That entire structure can completely vanish. They describe a state where thoughts, sights, and bodily sensations are still occurring, but there is absolutely no one owning them. The boundary between their physical body and the environment dissolves completely. They experience what contemplative traditions call pure awareness, or just knowing, a wide-open, spacious consciousness without a localized center. In Buddhist psychology, this isn't a hallucination. It is a direct glimpse into anatta, the profound truth of non-self, the realization that the ego is not a solid, permanent thing, but a fluid, temporary construct. So, what does neuroscience have to say about this spooky existential vanishing act? Well, researchers have pointed their scanners at the brain and found something fascinating. When you are doing absolutely nothing, when you're sitting on a bus, daydreaming, replaying an awkward conversation from 3 years ago, or worrying about your finances, a specific web of interconnected brain regions fires up. This is called the default mode network, or the DMN. The DMN is essentially your brain's ego machine. It handles self-referential thought, your personal narrative, mind wandering, and social evaluation. When scientists put experienced meditators into fMRI machines, they discovered that during deep practice, activity in this default mode network drops off a cliff. The baseline chatter of the ego machine goes quiet. The functional connectivity between the DMN and the brain's attention networks completely reorganizes. But here is the mystery deepens. Knowing where this happens in the brain doesn't actually explain how it feels. The standard neurological model claims that your brain constructs your sense of self out of multiple layered processes. Interoception, which is your awareness of your internal organs. Proprioception, your map of where your limbs are. Episodic memory, and social cognition. Meditation somehow manages to desynchronize or temporarily silence these systems. But why does this neurological shutdown feel like a massive, ecstatic liberation rather than a terrifying medical emergency? If you suddenly lost your sense of self in a grocery store without warning, you'd probably call an ambulance, fearing a stroke or a psychotic break. Yet, under the controlled conditions of meditation, this exact same dissolution brings about absolute, unshakable peace. Philosophers and cognitive scientists are locked in a fierce debate over this. Is there a minimal, basic form of perspectival consciousness that stays online even when the ego is gone? Or can every single layer of selfhood vanish, leaving behind an awareness that is truly empty? We can watch the DMN quiet down on a monitor, but the bridge between that physical drop in electrical activity and the sublime first-person experience of selflessness remains one of the most glaring conceptual gaps in modern science. Mystery 2. How does meditation change the brain long-term? Alright, so meditation can change your brain state in the moment, but what happens when you get up off the cushion and walk away? Does meditation actually leave a permanent mark on your physical brain anatomy? For a long time, Western science believed that the adult brain was relatively fixed. You were dealt a certain hand of neurons, and that was it. But the discovery of neuroplasticity changed everything, proving that the brain structurally adapts to whatever you repeatedly throw at it. And meditation throws a lot at it. When neuroimaging researchers compare the brains of long-term meditators, people who have logged thousands of hours of practice, with non-meditators, they observe stark, undeniable structural differences. First, they see increased cortical thickness in the prefrontal cortex, the command center for executive functioning, top-down attention, and cognitive control. Second, they find significantly greater gray matter volume in the insula, a region tucked deep inside the brain that acts as the primary hub for interoception and body awareness. They also see structural growth in the hippocampus, which handles memory and emotional regulation, and an increase in the white matter pathways that act as high-speed data cables connecting these distant brain regions. And this isn't just something that takes a lifetime of monastic isolation to achieve. Longitudinal studies of complete novices, regular people undergoing basic 8-week mindfulness courses, have shown measurable, modest structural adaptations in these exact same regions in just a couple of months. It seems like your brain software can literally rebuild its own hardware. Functionally, the changes are just as wild. When exposed to highly stressful or negative stimuli, long-term meditators show remarkably reduced reactivity in the amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system for fear and threat detection. Instead of a knee-jerk emotional hijack, their prefrontal cortex steps in seamlessly, dampening the alarm before it can overwhelm the system. EEG readouts also reveal that highly advanced practitioners can generate massive, sustained patterns of gamma band oscillations, fast, highly coordinated brainwaves associated with peak cognitive performance, heightened perception, and the binding of sensory information. So where is the mystery? If we can see the structural changes, haven't we solved the puzzle? Not even close. The first major problem is causality. A lot of these studies are cross-sectional, meaning scientists take a group of meditators, compare them to non-meditators, and spot the differences. But how do we know meditation caused those differences? What if people who naturally have a thicker prefrontal cortex or a more stable amygdala are simply more likely to stick with meditation for 10 years, while people with different brain structures give up out of sheer frustration? Even in short-term studies, it is incredibly difficult to isolate meditation from other variables like the placebo effect, positive lifestyle shifts, diet, or the simple act of taking a quiet break away from your screens. The second puzzle is functional significance. In the scientific press, we often see headlines like, "Meditation grows your brain," as if a bigger brain region is automatically a better one. But in neuroscience, structural changes are highly ambiguous. Does a thicker cortex mean there are more neurons, more connection points, less synaptic pruning, more support cells? And what does that physical change actually mean for your day-to-day experience when you're trying to navigate an argument with your boss or handle a family crisis? The precise, fine-grained map linking physical neuroplastic restructuring to stable psychological transformation remains largely unwritten. Mystery 3. Why do some people reach profound states quickly while others do not? Ask any experienced meditation teacher or retreat director behind closed doors, and they will admit to a messy, highly inconvenient truth. Individual learning curves in meditation are wildly, drastically unequal. Imagine two people walking into the exact same meditation retreat. They sit on identical cushions, listen to the exact same instructions, and eat the same food. Within 48 hours, meditator A reports that they have plunged into a profound, life-altering, altered state of consciousness, experiencing a wash of ecstatic joy, a total loss of body boundaries, or a deep existential insight into the nature of reality. Meanwhile, meditator B spends the entire 10 days fighting off a raging foot cramp, battling an endless internal loop of an annoying pop song, and feeling nothing but baseline frustration, boredom, and a mild desire to escape through the window. Why does this happen? Why do some minds unlock these deep states almost instantly, while others can practice diligently for decades and barely achieve more than a pleasant state of light relaxation? Scientists are desperately trying to unravel this massive variance, and they are looking at a few primary culprits. Genetic and neurobiological profiles. We aren't born with identical brain chemistry. Subtle variations in your genes regulating serotonin, dopamine, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor can dictate how highly sensitive your neural networks are to intentional mental training. Some brains are simply wired to be highly plastic and responsive to contemplative techniques, while others are incredibly stubborn. Personality and temperament. Psychology points toward a trait known as absorption. People who score high in absorption have a natural capacity to get deeply, completely lost in sensory experiences, art, or internal imagery. If you're the kind of person who gets so sucked into a good book that you completely forget your surroundings, your brain already has a structural leg up when it comes to entering deep meditative states. Other traits, like openness to experience and emotional stability, act as powerful accelerators or brakes. Baseline cognitive scaffolding. Your working memory capacity, your natural ability to control attention, and your baseline level of rumination before you ever touch a meditation cushion completely alter your starting point. Intention, context, and prior traumas. The sheer intensity of your motivation matters. Are you meditating to lower your blood pressure, or are you driven by an urgent existential need for spiritual awakening? Furthermore, prior exposures to altered states, whether through psychedelics, profound religious experiences, or even unresolved emotional traumas, can completely reshape how your mind navigates the sudden quiet of meditation. But this individual variability introduces a massive ethical and conceptual minefield for the meditation community. When we frame meditation as a linear path where more hours equals more progress, we accidentally create a toxic environment of spiritual competition and profound disappointment. Novices who don't experience spectacular fireworks can feel like failures, or worse, they might try to force states of deep absorption through sheer willpower, which contemplative traditions explicitly warn can destabilize the mind and become a major obstacle to genuine insight. Scientifically, this variability means that meditation cannot be studied like a standard pharmaceutical pill. We cannot say, take 20 minutes of mindfulness daily and expect X result. The exact same practice can act as a profound spiritual awakening for one person, a mild stress reliever for another, and an aggravating trigger for someone else. The deep code of individual neurocontemplative trajectories remains a wide-open mystery. Mystery 4. What exactly is mindfulness in the brain? If you've spent more than 5 minutes in the self-care world, you've heard the word mindfulness repeated like a sacred mantra. It's everywhere. It's in our schools, our hospitals, corporate boardrooms, and military training programs. But if you stop a neuroscientist, a clinical psychologist, and an ancient Buddhist scholar on the street, and ask them to give you a precise definition of what mindfulness actually is, you are going to get a chaotic mess of conflicting answers. The truth is, mindfulness is an incredibly slippery, ambiguous umbrella term. In common parlance, we define it as present moment awareness, maintained with a non-judgmental, accepting attitude, where we observe our thoughts and sensations without immediately reacting to them. But in research, mindfulness is forced to wear way too many hats. Is it a fleeting mental state that you can experience for a few seconds? Is it a permanent personality trait that some people possess more than others? Is it a specific family of practices like body scans and breath awareness? Or it is a structured clinical intervention like mindfulness-based stress reduction. Because we use the exact same word for all four of these distinct concepts, trying to lock down a single, definitive neural signature of mindfulness has been an absolute nightmare for cognitive science. When researchers run brain scans on people performing mindfulness tasks, they don't see one clean mindfulness switch flipping on. Instead, they see a highly complex, dynamic tug-of-war between completely different brain networks. They see the prefrontal and parietal regions lighting up to handle top-down attentional control and keep the mind focused. They see the anterior cingulate cortex firing away to monitor conflict, catching the exact millisecond the mind drifts off into daydreaming. They see the insula illuminating to process bottom-up sensory data and internal bodily signals. And simultaneously, they see a dampening of the default mode network to suppress narrative self-rumination. Current neuroscientific models state that mindfulness is a dynamic optimization of these networks, an elegant balance where top-down cognitive control keeps you steady. Bottom-up sensory awareness opens you up to raw reality, and the brain's automatic evaluative machinery is dialed down so you stop judging your own experiences. But here is where the model cracks open. Think about the massive task confounds in these experiments. If a scientist tells a participant in an fMRI machine to focus intently on the physical sensation of the breath at the tip of the nose, that task requires heavy-duty, generic attention. A non-meditator trying to catch a sniper in a video game is using those exact same prefrontal and ACC attention networks. So, how do we isolate the unique cognitive ingredient that makes an experience mindful rather than just intensely focused? Furthermore, the phenomenology of an absolute novice trying to be non-judgmental looks completely different from that of a master practitioner. The novice is using massive, exhausting, top-down willpower to push away distracted thoughts. The expert is resting in a state of completely effortless, open, non-reactive clarity. Yet, in many scientific studies, both are tossed into the exact same bucket labeled mindfulness. Until we can develop a highly precise, consensus-driven mechanistic language that maps these subtle experiential shifts to specific computational brain states, the neural essence of mindfulness remains beautifully elusive. Mystery 5. Can meditation unlock unusual mental abilities? Let's dive into some highly controversial territory. If you open up historical contemplative texts, like classical Hindu manuals or ancient Buddhist scriptures, you will inevitably stumble across a list of extraordinary, borderline supernatural abilities attributed to master meditators. These are known in Sanskrit as the siddhis. We are talking about claims of heightened sensory perception, the ability to read minds, extreme memory feats, total mastery over physical pain, and even wild, paranormal claims. Now, modern mainstream science obviously rolls its eyes at claims of telepathy and levitation. There is zero robust, reproducible empirical evidence for paranormal phenomena. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary, foolproof evidence that simply does not exist in a laboratory setting. Even within ancient contemplative traditions, master teachers warn students. They warn never to chase these flashy, paranormal states, dismissing them as dangerous traps, ego-inflating distractions, or purely metaphorical milestones. But if we strip away the supernatural folklore, meditation research has uncovered something that is, in its own way, just as mind-boggling. Meditation can push ordinary, natural human cognitive capacities to thresholds that look downright superhuman to the average person. Consider what has been empirically verified in laboratories around the world: attention and cognitive control. On standard psychometric testing, advanced meditators show levels of sustained attention and response inhibition that completely outclass control groups. They can maintain laser-like focus on monotonous tasks for durations that would cause an average brain to completely tune out or fall asleep. Perceptual sensitivity. In practices that emphasize extreme sensory clarity, meditators can detect incredibly subtle, fleeting visual or auditory changes. Changes like micro-flashes of light that completely bypass the conscious awareness of ordinary people. The melting of physical pain. This is perhaps the most stunning achievement. When exposed to painful thermal stimuli in a lab setting, experienced meditators report feeling significantly less distressed than non-meditators. Brain scans reveal a fascinating neural mechanism. Their brains register the raw sensory data of the burn, but they completely decouple it from the emotional circuitry. They experience the heat as a raw physical sensation, completely stripped of the psychological panic that screams, "I am suffering." So, where does the mystery lie? The mystery is not about magic, it's about the upper limits of human optimization. We are looking at a practice that can radically decouple sensory input from emotional output, completely overriding ancient, hardwired biological survival mechanisms. Meditation proves that our default state of consciousness is not fixed. It is a highly malleable, highly tunable system. It forces us to ask, what other hidden human capacities are waiting to be unlocked by simply changing the way we pay attention? Mystery 6. Why does time seem to slow down or disappear? We've all experienced the bizarre relativity of time. If you're stuck in a boring 3-hour lecture, a single minute can feel like an eternity. If you're having a fantastic night out with your favorite people, 6 hours can vanish in the blink of an eye. Our brains do not track clock time. They construct an internal, highly subjective experience of duration. But meditation takes this everyday psychological phenomenon and pushes it to a radical extreme. During long meditation retreats, practitioners routinely report profound distortions in their temporal map. During deep, mindful immersion in the present moment, an individual might feel like a single breath has expanded to occupy an immense, spacious eternity. Time slows down to a beautiful, frozen crawl. Conversely, a practitioner might sit down for an intensive session, plunge into a deep state of concentration, and open their eyes to realize that 4 hours have passed in what felt like 20 minutes. And in the deepest states of absolute absorption, the temporal sequence breaks down entirely. Meditators describe an experience of complete timelessness, a state where there is no past, no future, and no transition between moments, but rather a single, eternal, unchanging now. To understand why this happens, we have to look at how the brain builds time in the first place. The attention engine. If you constantly check the clock, you clog your attention network with temporal data, making intervals feel painfully dragged out. If you are deeply absorbed in a task, your attention is pulled away from time tracking, causing time to fly. The arousal engine. When your body's sympathetic nervous system fires up, like during a car crash or a moment of intense fear, your brain speeds up its internal processing rate, making the external world appear to move in slow motion. The memory engine. Your retrospective judgment of time depends on how many discrete, distinct memory packets your brain encodes during an interval. Meditation systematically disrupts all three of these engines simultaneously. It activates the relaxation response, dropping your physiological arousal to rock-bottom levels. It forcefully shifts your attention away from narrative planning, which is inherently time-based, and anchors it entirely into raw, non-conceptual sensory data. And by quieting the mind's internal commentary, it drastically reduces the number of distinct psychological events that your brain logs into memory. Neurally, this shifts activity across a massive, distributed time-tracking network that links the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, and the insula. But here is the real philosophical head-scratcher. When a meditator reports an experience of absolute timelessness, what is actually happening to their conscious awareness? Philosophers suggest that meditation strips away the conceptual overlay of time, revealing a primal, foundational layer of awareness that doesn't require a past or a future to exist. It suggests that our normal experience of time flowing linearly is just a clever, hardwired evolutionary illusion constructed by the brain to help us track threats and plan for survival. Meditation tears down that construct, leaving us face to face with an unconditioned, timeless presence. but how a physical brain, which functions entirely through chronological, sequential, chemical, and electrical signals, can generate a first-person experience that is completely devoid of sequence, remains a profound neurocomputational paradox. Mystery 7. What causes mystical experiences? Throughout history, across every culture imaginable, humans have stumbled into a category of subjective experience so profound, so overwhelming, that it completely rewrites a person's entire life trajectory in a matter of minutes. We call them mystical experiences. Whether they occur spontaneously on a mountaintop, during a near-death crisis, through the intentional ingestion of psychedelic plants, or at the peak of intense meditative absorption, these states display a set of universal characteristics meticulously mapped out by psychologists like Walter Stace. A profound sense of unity, the absolute collapse of the self-other boundary, the unshakable realization that you are not separate from the universe, but an interconnected part of a single cosmic whole. The quality of noesis, the absolute conviction that this experience is not a dream or a hallucination, but a direct encounter with ultimate reality, absolute truth, or the sacred. Ineffability, the feeling that the state is so radically outside the bounds of human concepts that it is completely impossible to describe in words. A shift in values, a permanent, long-lasting drop in the fear of death, accompanied by an immediate surge in pro-social values, compassion, and life purpose. For a long time, mainstream science brushed these reports aside as religious delusions or brain glitches, but the modern psychedelic renaissance has forced neuroscience to take mystical states incredibly seriously. When researchers administer substances like psilocybin to participants in clinical trials, they can reliably trigger experiences that score maximum points on standardized mystical questionnaires. And when they look at the brains of those individuals, they see a neural profile that looks shockingly similar to that of a master meditator in deep, non-dual absorption. A massive drop in default mode network activity, coupled with a radical, explosive increase in global functional connectivity across the entire brain. This tells us something monumental. The human brain possesses hardwired neurochemical architecture explicitly designed to facilitate mystical states of unity. We are biologically built to experience the sacred. But this realization lands us right in front of a massive, unavoidable interpretive gap, separating two radically different worldviews. The naturalist constructivist view. This side argues that a mystical experience is purely an internal brain event. Meditation or chemicals cause a temporary neurochemical storm, scrambling the brain's boundary-creating mechanisms. Your brain glitches, misinterprets its own lack of boundaries as universal oneness, and your cultural conditioning swoops in to color the experience, labeling it as God, the Tao, cosmic consciousness, or emptiness. It's a beautiful, highly therapeutic biological illusion. The realist perennialist view. This side counters that the brain isn't generating the content of the experience. It's acting as a filter or a reducing valve. In normal waking life, your brain has to restrict your awareness to a narrow, localized ego construct. Meditation quietens that biological filtering mechanism, allowing you to peek past the illusion of separation. And directly encounter the underlying, unified fabric of reality. Science is phenomenally good at charting the neural correlates of these states. We can track the firing networks and measure the serotonin receptors. But by its very nature, objective third-person science cannot adjudicate this ultimate metaphysical question. Whether meditation is unlocking a brilliant neurobiological survival mechanism or peeling back the veil to reveal the literal truth of the universe remains one of the most hauntingly beautiful mysteries of the human mind. Mystery 8. How does meditation reduce suffering? Let's pivot back to something concrete, practical, and deeply urgent. Millions of people around the globe do not meditate because they want to experience timelessness or meet the cosmos. They meditate because they are hurting. They are drowning in anxiety, battling severe depression, struggling with trauma, or trying to survive chronic physical pain. And the clinical data is overwhelming. Programs like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, are highly effective clinical interventions. Meditation systematically reduces scores of psychological distress, dampens the body's inflammatory stress response, and dramatically elevates baseline qualities of life. But if you stop and think about it, the way meditation accomplishes this is completely counterintuitive. In traditional Western psychology, if you're plagued by a negative, painful thought or a traumatic memory, the standard approach is to engage with it. You analyze it, you challenge its rationality through cognitive behavioral therapy, or you try to replace it with a more positive framing. Meditation does something completely different. It tells you to sit down, close your eyes, and turn directly toward the pain. It tells you to fully feel the anxiety, fully experience the discomfort, without trying to fix it, change it, or escape it for a single second. How on earth does diving straight into the discomfort result in the alleviation of suffering? Psychologists point to a few core mechanisms to explain this paradox. Decentering, or cognitive diffusion. This is the profound psychological shift where you stop looking from your thoughts and start looking at them. Instead of being swept away by the internal script that says, "My life is a disaster," you step back and realize, there is a passing thought content predicting disaster. You realize you are the sky, not the weather. Experiential acceptance. Suffering, from a contemplative perspective, is calculated using an elegant formula. Pain multiplied by resistance equals suffering. Pain is an inevitable part of a human life. You will get sick, you will experience loss, you will feel physical discomfort. But resistance is the secondary psychological panic, the screaming desire for the present moment to be different than it is. When you practice absolute acceptance, you reduce your resistance to zero, causing the suffering component to evaporate, leaving behind nothing but the raw, manageable physical sensation of the pain itself. Exposure and extinction. By repeatedly turning toward your fears with a calm, regulated body, you teach your amygdala that these internal thoughts and memories cannot actually harm you, systematically deconditioning your ancient survival alarms over time. Recently, cognitive science has started explaining this through a fascinating framework known as predictive processing. This model views your brain as a highly advanced prediction engine. You do not experience raw reality. Your brain uses its past experiences to construct top-down predictions about what should be happening, assigning a high degree of confidence, or precision weighting, to those predictions. If you suffer from clinical depression or chronic anxiety, your brain's prediction engine has become incredibly rigid. It assigns an extremely high precision weight to negative interpretations, constantly screaming, "This situation is highly threatening. This bodily sensation means panic." Meditation, particularly open monitoring and deep insight practices, acts as a systematic way to relax those over-precise, rigid, top-down predictions. By forcing you to rest in raw, immediate sensory data, it trains the brain to dial down its anxious assumptions, allowing your mental models to dynamically update with flexibility and ease. Yet the fine-grained mechanics remain a major area of exploration. Why do some individuals experience an immediate, life-saving release from suffering after a short course, while others with identical diagnoses show zero change? How do we map these elegant computational prediction shifts down to individual neural networks? The broad psychological strokes are clear, but the precise neural engineering of how meditation transforms human suffering is still being actively decoded. Mystery 9. Why do different meditation methods produce different experiences? Imagine walking into a fitness gym, walking up to a random machine, performing a bicep curl, and then assuming that every single exercise in that building, from squats to heavy cardio to yoga stretches, does the exact same thing to your body. That sounds ridiculous, right? Yet, the scientific community and the general public routinely make this exact same mistake when it comes to the mind. We treat meditation as if it is a single, uniform activity. But the word meditation is actually an umbrella term for an immense, diverse family of highly distinct mental training systems, each utilizing radically different instructions, targeting completely different cognitive machinery, and producing entirely unique experiential and neural profiles. Neurally, these differences are stark. Let's look at how these techniques vary across cognitive actions and experiential profiles. Focused attention targets laser focus on a single object, while open monitoring maintains non-reactive awareness of the entire present field. Loving kindness generates benevolent wishes, while visualization involves the active construction of complex internal sacred imagery. If you practice focused attention, you see heavy activation across the brain's frontal-parietal attention networks. If you shift to open monitoring, that centralized focus drops away, replaced by broader changes in the salience and monitoring networks. If you transition into loving kindness practices, your attention networks take a back seat, and the brain's emotional, affiliative networks light up like a Christmas tree, mirroring the neural signatures of maternal love and intense social bonding. Meanwhile, visualization practices engage the visual cortex as if you are literally looking at an external object with your physical eyes. So, where is the mystery? The mystery lies in the lack of a comprehensive, unified mechanistic map. Right now, science has a macro-level catalog, but we are in the dark regarding the fine-grained nuances. Historical practices don't exist in isolation. They are blended and dynamic. A single session might start with focused attention, transition into open monitoring, and culminate in non-dual awareness. We lack the data to answer why a specific style resonates deeply with one person's temperament while causing intense psychological friction for someone else. How do the distinct long-term neuroplastic trajectories of a concentration-heavy path compare to an insight-heavy or a devotion-heavy path over 20 years? We know that different keys unlock completely different doors in the mind, but we have only just begun to map the locks. Mystery 10. What is the deepest state of consciousness? We have finally arrived at the absolute edge of the map, the frontier where contemplative science and Western psychology stand staring at each other in total bewilderment. What is the absolute deepest, most advanced state of consciousness that a human being can possibly access through meditation? If you consult advanced contemplative traditions, they will map out a series of internal states that sound like absolute science fiction to standard medical psychology. The Buddhist jhanas, a series of 8 increasingly refined, deep states of absorptive concentration. It begins with states of overwhelming physical rapture and joy, which systematically refine into profound tranquility, then into pure equanimity, before breaking through into formless dimensions, where your sense of space becomes infinite, your consciousness becomes boundless, and eventually you enter a dimension of absolute nothingness. Nirodha Samapatti, an extraordinary state described in Theravada Buddhism where an advanced practitioner enters a total cessation of all perception, thought, and feeling. The mind and body go completely offline, entering a state akin to profound hibernation, only for the practitioner to emerge hours later with radical, permanent cognitive updates. Rigpa/non-dual awareness. Emphasized in Tibetan Dzogchen and Advaita Vedanta traditions, this is a state of naked, contentless, or minimally contentful awareness. It is an experience of consciousness itself, fully awake, fully vivid, yet completely free from the dualistic split between a subject looking at an object. It is awareness recognizing its own fundamental nature. In Western medicine, states of consciousness are traditionally defined along a simple, flat axis: wakefulness versus responsiveness. You are either awake and alert, dreaming in REM sleep, unconscious in deep, slow-wave sleep, or down in a medical coma or vegetative state. Advanced meditative states completely break this diagnostic grid. When scientists manage to recruit rare, highly realized expert practitioners and scan them while they enter these profound states on demand, they witness mind-boggling physiological anomalies. They observe brains displaying patterns of massive, hypercoherent, high-amplitude gamma waves occurring simultaneously with physiological markers of profound, deep sleep. The body is in a state of absolute, near-metabolic hibernation, yet the mind is more vividly awake, coherent, and integrated than it is during normal day-to-day life. And this lands us face-to-face with a profound existential question. What does depth actually mean when it comes to consciousness? Are these exotic states genuinely new, advanced modes of neuroorganization, a literal evolution of the brain's functional capacity? Or are they simply extreme, hyper-focused anomalies within our normal biological range? Even more radically, should a state like Nirodha Samapatti, an experience of total, contentless cessation, be considered a state of consciousness at all? Or is it a temporary, intentional suspension of consciousness itself, bracketed by moments of profound awareness? These deep states push the absolute limits of our language, our science, and our philosophies, standing as a towering monument to how little we actually know about the full spectrum of the human mind. Conclusion: the laboratory from within. When we look across all 10 of these profound mysteries, from the vanishing of the self to the collapse of time, from structural neuroplastic restructuring to the heights of mystical absorption, we realize that they are not 10 isolated puzzles. They are all beautiful facets of a single monumental question that has haunted human philosophy for centuries: the hard problem of consciousness. How does a physical brain, a 3-pound lump of wet electrical and chemical tissue sitting inside a dark skull, give rise to the brilliant, vivid first-person reality of being alive? How does matter become mind? Modern materialist science has made immense strides in mapping the neural correlations of our experiences. We know which buttons to push to change your mood. We know which networks fire when you see the color red or feel a flash of fear. But finding a correlation is not the same thing as finding an explanation. There is still a massive, seemingly impassable, explanatory chasm between an electrical signal firing across a synapse and the actual felt quality of an ecstatic mystical experience or the sublime peace of selfless awareness. And this is precisely why meditation is so revolutionary. It is not a religious dogma. It is an empirical science of the first-person perspective. It is a rigorous, systematic laboratory from within. Just as Galileo turned his telescope outward to systematically chart the objective movements of the stars, transforming our understanding of the physical cosmos, meditation turns the lens of attention directly inward to systematically chart the subjective movements of the mind. It expands the empirical dataset of human consciousness far beyond the narrow, restricted limits of ordinary waking life. It proves to us that the ego, the ticking clock, and the weight of our psychological suffering are not immutable laws of nature. They are temporary, malleable software programs constructed by a highly plastic brain. The future of understanding who and what we are cannot be achieved by neuroscience alone, nor can it be achieved by contemplative isolation alone. The true frontier lies in a radical, interdisciplinary collaboration, a dialogue where the rigorous, third-person objective tools of Western science seamlessly weave together with the profound, first-person subjective insights of ancient contemplative traditions. Only then can we hope to crack open the deepest mysteries of the mind, bridging the gap between the firing neuron and the awakened soul. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep journey into the architecture of the mind. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a distortion of time during your own meditation practice? Have you ever felt that strange, beautiful moment where the boundaries of your ego began to soften? Or do you think these states are all just fascinating evolutionary glitches of our biological hardware? Drop your thoughts, your experiences, and your questions in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going. If you found this video valuable, hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and share this with anyone who is trying to look past the surface of their daily mindfulness practice. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember to find a moment of stillness in the middle of the noise. See you in the next video.